So, you've probably heard the phrase, right? Crack is whack. It's this iconic line that's been part of our culture for decades. But what does it actually mean from a scientific standpoint? Well, in this explainer, we're going to dive deep and break down the science of how crack cocaine really hijacks the brain.
Yep, that's the one. Back in the day, the one and only Whitney Houston said this, and it just stuck. It's so simple, so powerful. It became this huge cultural touchstone, A really stark warning packed into just 3 little words.
Okay, so let's really get into it. Let's go beyond the slogan. We're going to look at the chemistry, the neurology, the whole shebang, to understand what exactly crack cocaine is, how it works in the body, and what makes its effects so uniquely dangerous.
All right, so first things first. Before we can get into the effects, we gotta understand what this stuff even is. Where does it come from? And what really makes it different from the powdered cocaine you usually hear about?
Okay, so at its core, crack is just another form of cocaine, which, as you may know, comes from the leaves of the coca plant. But the key difference is how it's processed. You take powdered cocaine, mix it with something like baking soda, and you get this solid crystal, or rock. And that name, crack, well, it's super literal. It comes from the actual crackling sound it makes when it's heated. And check this out. This table really breaks down the crucial difference. Chemically, we're talking about the same active ingredient. But the form, that changes absolutely everything. Just look at the melting points. Crack melts at a way lower temperature, which is why it can be vaporized and smoked. Powdered cocaine, its melting point is so high you can't really smoke it effectively, which is why it's usually snorted. And trust me, this one little difference in how you use it, that's the key to everything that comes next.
And that brings us right to the next critical piece of this whole puzzle, speed. It's all about speed. So why is smoking it so much more intense than snorting it? Well, it all comes down to a race to the brain.
Just look at this contrast. It's wild. When crack is smoked, that vapor goes straight into your lungs, which have this massive surface area. They're basically designed to get stuff into your bloodstream instantly. It's like a direct superhighway to the brain. We're talking 8 seconds. 8! Compare that to snorting cocaine, which has to take this slow journey through the membranes in your nose. That can take 10 minutes. This incredible speed, that's what creates that legendary intense rush.
Okay, so the drug has made it to the brain in record time. Now what? What is it actually doing once it gets there? To figure that out, we have to go microscopic and see how it completely hijacks one of our most important systems, the brain's reward pathway.
So, your brain has this amazing built-in reward system, right? When you do something you enjoy, like eating your favorite food or hearing a song you love, your brain cells, your neurons, release a chemical called dopamine. It floats across this tiny gap, plugs into the next neuron, and boom, you feel good. Then this little protein called a dopamine transporter comes along and acts like a tiny vacuum cleaner, sucking the leftover dopamine back up so it can be used again. It's a really neat and tidy system.
Okay, now here's where the hijacking begins. Crack does one simple, devastating thing. It blocks that transporter. It literally jams the vacuum cleaner. The brain's cleanup crew is completely shut down. It just can't suck that dopamine back up. And what's the result of that? A total chemical flood. With that recycling system jammed, dopamine just builds up and up and up in that space between your brain cells. It just keeps hitting those pleasure receptors over and over again. And that is what creates this overwhelming, totally unnatural wave of euphoria and energy. But a wave that high is destined to crash. Hard. Right, because that insane high, that massive dopamine flood, it only lasts for about 10 minutes. And as we all know, what goes up that fast has to come down even faster. And that's what kicks off this incredibly powerful and dangerous cycle. And this is the trap. After that super brief high, your dopamine levels don't just go back to normal, they plummet. This causes this awful extreme low. You feel depressed, anxious, just completely exhausted. And your brain, feeling totally deprived, starts screaming one thing: get more, do it again. Over time, your brain actually gets less sensitive to normal everyday pleasures like food or music. It becomes dependent on the drug to feel any pleasure at all. And that is the vicious cycle of addiction right there.
So let's zoom out a bit. How does this crazy chemical reaction in the brain translate to the rest of the body? Well, it sets off a whole cascade of dangerous effects. This is where we really see the full, terrifying picture of why this drug is so harmful.
Yeah, the psychological fallout is pretty much immediate.
When your brain's chemistry gets thrown into that much chaos, you can expect intense irritability, restlessness, even paranoia. Think about it. The very same drug that creates that incredible wave of euphoria can, just moments later, trigger severe agitation and anxiety. It's a chemical roller coaster, and your brain is just struggling to hang on.
And one of the most disturbing psychological effects, and honestly, this sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it's very real, is a condition called delusional parasitosis. This is where users have this vivid, terrifying hallucination that there are bugs crawling under their skin. It feels so real that it can lead to serious self-harm, with people frantically trying to scratch or even cut these imaginary bugs out. And look, the danger is absolutely not just psychological. Crack puts an incredible amount of stress on your heart and your entire cardiovascular system. We're talking about a much higher risk of heart attacks, strokes, and in the most extreme cases, cardiac arrest, where the heart literally just stops. It can lead to sudden death.
So when we go back to that famous quote, "Crack is whack," the science couldn't be clearer about how right Whitney Houston was. We're talking about a drug that gives you a lightning-fast 10-minute high by completely hijacking your brain's pleasure system, only for it to be followed by a devastating crash and a whole list of life-threatening risks. The science really just leaves us with one very stark question. Is a 10-minute high really worth a potential lifetime of consequences?